Chaos had erupted, all hell had broken loose, and nightmares were running amok. Even from her perspective, watching as fleshy abominations tore through the streets of New York City, Eliza Flynn couldn't escape the feeling that the entire world had gone mad. Only moments before, things had been calm, normal, another mundane, uninteresting day in the Big Apple. Now she was watching in horror from underneath an overturned table as a group of things had seemingly appeared out of nowhere. Unbeknownst to Eliza, these creatures were instances of something known as SCP-610, alternatively going by the name The Flesh That Hates. From her hiding place inside the local coffee shop she frequented, they looked like horrific mutated masses of flesh that barely resembled anything even close to human. But that's what they were, or at least had been. Eliza had witnessed a barista rushing out into the street, trying to get away from a group of SCP-610s that were bashing their appendages against the front window. In trying to make a break for it, the mutated creatures attacked the barista, killing him upon making contact with his skin. It was only a short while afterwards that Eliza spotted his body moving. The infectious process only accelerated by the heat from a nearby car that was on fire. Before long, what had once been a barista, an ordinary person, was now another of the grotesque flesh monsters. Mike, she remembered. His name had been Mike. She'd read it on his name tag when she came in for her morning coffee. He had always smiled, never got the spelling of her name right on her to-go cup, writing it with an S instead of a Z, and now he was gone. Worse than dead, he wasn't even Mike anymore, instead turned into another SCP-610 monstrosity. Too petrified to move, terrified of being caught and turned into another of the fleshy nightmares, Eliza stayed hidden. This was it, she thought to herself. Any moment now, one of those things would find her, either breaking through the street-facing window of the coffee shop or slithering in through the rear fire door. Sure enough, the flesh formerly known as Mike, the barista, turned. Where had once there been a head was now a featureless blob that had fused with the shoulder, but Eliza could tell its eyeless stare was being directed at her, and she had nowhere to run. Mike's arm, which was now a slimy blood-red tentacle, began slamming against the glass, cracks forming across the surface. Eliza's eyes darted around the room, trying to look for some kind of way out. Her options were limited, and even then, they didn't amount to more than hiding in a storage cupboard and prolonging the inevitable. She needed a miracle. As if to answer her prayers, a blinding white light erupted from somewhere out of view, beyond the window. Turning away, Eliza had to shield her eyes from the searing glow, blinking away spots in her vision as she looked to see what had happened. The SCP-610 creature, Mike, had vanished, a dark outline scorched against the glass, as if it had been obliterated by an intense, focused blast. That light, whatever it was, had vaporized it. The sound of commotion came bustling through the door, and distorted, mechanical-sounding voices called out. "Hello? Is anyone there? Hello? Is anyone in here?" One garbled. "We mean you no harm," another said, "but you need to leave this place as soon as you can." Cautiously, Eliza stood up from under the table. Standing at the entrance to the coffee shop were a trio of figures. Each one of them had machinery, all manner of metallic components protruding from their bodies, replacing arms, legs, parts of their faces. Eliza stared at them, unsure whether these cyborgs were as harmless as they claimed. One even had a cannon in place of one of their hands, which was still smoking from the blast that had killed the SCP-610 instances outside. "Did the flesh make contact with you?" one of the figures asked. "No," Eliza replied. "That's how they spread, right? It's like an infection. I watched it happen." "Indeed," the cyborg with the cannon arm replied. "The flesh being loose is only the beginning. If you are uninfected, then we'd ask you to come with us. We'll explain on the way." "Hang on, who are you?" Eliza asked, concern on her face. "And where are you taking me?" "We are the Church of the Broken God," one of them answered, "and we're getting you out of New York." The idea of a person making their way out of the city that never sleeps on foot would be laughable to anyone that lived there, even before it had become overrun with monsters. But the subway wasn't exactly running on time, and the roads were gridlocked with cars that had either been destroyed or abandoned by their owners. so walking out of New York was the only option. The Church of the Broken God cyborgs explained to Eliza as much as they knew about what had happened. They described an organization, a secret cabal with power spanning the entire world called the SCP Foundation. Apparently, this foundation had been responsible for gathering and safeguarding the world from dangerous and unexplained phenomena. "You mean like those flesh things?" she asked. "Exactly. They called those SCP-610. But recently, something had changed. The Foundation had turned its seemingly inexhaustible resources to the goal of exterminating humanity. It was by their hands that instances of SCP-610 had been unleashed in major cities, not just New York, but Delhi, Tokyo, London, and countless others. Those were far from the only anomalies the Foundation had deployed either. As they walked, the cyborgs described how someone called Mr. Deeds had been assassinating heads of state the world over. They also spoke of a horrifying reptile that was now running wild and slaughtering everything in its path. "We at the church had to act. Whatever the Foundation's reasons for unleashing this hell, we couldn't sit by and allow them to destroy everything. So we've aligned ourselves with the Global Occult Coalition to assist them in fighting against the flesh that hates. In exchange, we have vowed to help transport survivors to safety." "But where can we possibly go that's safe?" Eliza interjected. "If the Foundation have the reach you say they do, if they have all these horrible creatures at their disposal, what chance do we have at surviving?" "Well, there is always our path," one of the Broken God's followers replied. "The path of standardization, becoming one with machine. Our mechanized parts are safe from the flesh's corruption. If you would consider joining us." Eliza took a quick glance at the metallic components of her cyborg companions. They looked like they hurt as much as becoming a SCP-610 monster would have. She politely declined, although it led to the rest of their journey continuing in an awkward silence. Eventually, the Broken God cyborgs brought Eliza to an extraction point, where they left her in the care of the Global Occult Coalition. Boarding a convoy, her and a number of others were ferried out of New York State by the GOC. For the first time since this had all started, Eliza started to think that maybe she was heading to somewhere safe. That sliver of hope all came crashing down the moment the convoy was attacked. Armed assailants opened fire on the trucks. They were quickly identified by Coalition soldiers as members of the SCP Foundation's mobile task forces, special operations troops sent out to pick off survivors. In the midst of the firefight, gunfire erupting all around her, Eliza never felt so terrified. One of the GOC officers turned to her as they crouched behind cover. "Listen, I shouldn't be telling you this, but there's rumors of a survivor settlement not far from here," he barked. "I'll draw their fire. You run. Get as far away from here fast as you can and don't look back." Doing as she was told, Eliza sprinted away from the wreckage of the convoy until her legs refused to run any further. She trudged alone through an empty town, abandoned. It felt like a place out of a nightmare. The world was decimated, virtually post-apocalyptic. The further she willed herself to walk, the more she could feel herself giving up that she would never even find the settlement, if it even existed at all. Hope had abandoned her, and at her lowest point, Eliza dug her heels in and dropped to the ground, both exhausted and convinced she'd been hiking towards nothing. The feeling of being moved caused Eliza to stir, waking her up from a dream that had been almost as bleak as her new reality. Someone was carrying her on what felt like a stretcher, she quickly realized. Before she had a chance to ask who they were, the pair of shadowy human shapes brought her through the woods to what looked like a campsite. "Don't be alarmed," one of them said in a voice that sounded so optimistic it felt almost alien, as if this person was from another planet where things were far less horrible. Looking around, Eliza noticed the glow of a campfire illuminating the nearby trees. A handful of people were huddled together in makeshift tents, resting and wearing contented, almost happy expressions. Then Eliza's eyes were drawn towards something else, some slimy mass gliding around the camp. At first she thought it was another instance of SCP-610, until she saw an amorphous, gelatinous orange blob glowing in the firelight. To the Foundation, it had been known as Scp-999, but to its newfound family of human survivors, this creature was their savior, a bastion of hope and happiness in a devastated hellscape, the Tickle Monster. Welcomed into the survivor community with open arms, Eliza was soon exposed to SCP-999's anomalous effects. The creature seemed to warm to her instantly, greeting her with the enthusiastic friendliness of a small dog. Even after as little as a single interaction with it, she felt her lack of hope and depressed feelings towards the bleakness of the world had almost entirely faded. She felt happiness, pure, genuine happiness, for the first time in recent memory. Thanks to the Tickle Monster, Eliza's entire outlook had completely changed. The same was true for the other survivors that had formed a settlement around the happy orange creature. They had all come seeking an escape, not just a physical place that was out of harm's way, but somewhere they could reject the harsh reality of what the SCP Foundation had done to the world. And SCP-999 had provided that for them all, curing the displaced refugees of their woes, keeping them in perpetually high spirits. Most of them had reached such a point of contentment that they'd forgotten their old lives before the collapse, before the anomalies, and the Foundation. Although the Tickle Monster demanded nothing of its newfound family, apart from the occasional playful tickle wrestle, Eliza and a group of the other survivors would venture back to the nearby abandoned town just beyond the woods. Once there, they would scavenge for as much food as they could find, keeping a close eye out for any candy with which to feed SCP-999. Even though they knew 999 was more than happy to provide positivity to the survivors, each one of them felt it was the least they could do for their favorite orange slime ball. There was such a continuous state of love and happiness in their camp that the survivors were hardly fazed when a Foundation soldier inadvertently stumbled upon their settlement. Before he could raise his weapon and fire, SCP-999 slid between its friends and the soldier, blocking the path of his bullets. Without any shred of malice or hostility, the delightful blob leaped towards the attacking MTF operative and embraced him. Instantly, the Foundation foot soldier's demeanor changed. Before he had been glassy-eyed, emotionless, like something deep inside him had broken. But after their hug parted, the man was euphoric, grinning in a state of elation for long afterwards. For a time, Eliza sat with the soldier, Sergeant Callows, and listened to him explaining how he wanted to renounce the Foundation, to stay with this community of survivors now he knew SCP-999 was here. "Do you remember anything from before?" she asked curiously. "Before?" Callows echoed. "You mean before the Foundation did all this?" Eliza nodded. Remembering the outside world was hazy now, like trying to recall the vague details of a dream. "Not much," the former MTF trooper answered. "They wanted us to kill everyone because of it." "What, like the Stephen King book?" "No," Callows chuckled. "They told us it had latched itself on to everyone, all human subconsciousness. It had plans, something really, really awful. So the Foundation's plan was to wipe everyone out." "Wouldn't that include everyone who works for the Foundation?" "No, they, altered us, made it so we couldn't feel pain anymore." He paused and began giggling uncontrollably, as if he had just understood the punchline to a joke. "In fact," Callows said between fits of laughter, "that's probably how 999 was able to fix me." Next to him, Eliza couldn't help but laugh too. The humor was infectious. "Because you couldn't feel pain?" she giggled. "Yeah!" Callows exploded, delighted tears rolling down his face. "I lost the capacity for it. I was hollowed out, and that would have made it easy for SCP-999 to fill that space with this." He rolled over onto the floor, still chortling unstoppably, and this didn't stop for hours. The Tickle Monster's powers of positivity had increased exponentially since it had found itself free from the Foundation facility it had used to live at. Much like Callow had explained to Eliza, it had allowed the lovable blob to correct the alteration the Foundation had made to the former MTF sergeant, allowing him to feel euphoria in the place of his total absence of all pain. And now, thanks to the influence of SCP-999, the threat posed by both the SCP Foundation and whatever this it entity was seemed so far away, so irrelevant, and did little to dampen the high spirits of the survivors in the camp. But in their collective sense of bliss, Eliza, SCP-999, and the other survivors became a little oblivious to the outside world and its horrors. Little did they know, there was still danger lurking much closer than they realized, one that had spread from miles away, and would very soon be at the settlement. It was Eliza and Callow that first discovered what was lurking nearby. They had both been searching for food in the ruins of the old town beyond the woods, which felt more and more like a completely different world the longer they spent in the camp with SCP-999. As Eliza rummaged through the storeroom of an abandoned supermarket, she heard a scream of agony coming from nearby. Callow. For the first time in months, panic, fear, and adrenaline rocked her system. It almost made her feel sick. She had been so overloaded with positive endorphins that it had practically numbed her to all other feelings. But instinct kicked in, fight or flight hitting her with the force of an ice-cold bucket of water, and she ran out into the store to look for Callow. What she saw gave her a terrified knot in her stomach, the kind she hadn't felt since the day the nightmare had started. The flesh that hates, an instance of SCP-610, was standing in the aisles of the empty supermarket. The sight of the grotesque mutated form shuffling towards her made Eliza freeze on the spot. It took a further moment to realize that Callow had long since stopped screaming. Eliza's thoughts had picked up speed. For the first time in months, she was processing information without it being dulled by the euphoria brought on by SCP-999. It made her realize that this SCP-610 had either killed Callow, and he'd soon be turning into one of those flesh creatures, or this was Callow, and he'd already changed. Thinking fast, Eliza sprinted through the supermarket, hearing the snarls of the flesh coming after her. She passed a shopping cart, and in an instant, grabbed its handlebar, turning the metal cage around and racing full force towards the SCP-610 instance chasing her. The cart collided with the blood-red mass of the flesh, the sheer force knocking the creature onto its back and giving Eliza a window of opportunity to race out of the supermarket, watched by a gaggle of mutated creatures. Those of them that still had eyes followed her movements as she ran back towards the woods, toward the camp, and slowly, the flesh that hates began to follow. From the moment that she returned to the settlement, SCP-999 could immediately sense that Eliza was in a state of panic. Instinctively, the creature glided up to her, only seeking to comfort her and make her forget about whatever had troubled her. "No! Stop!" she protested, as much as she wanted to not worry about the impending danger. SCP-999 recoiled from her, a wounded expression on its gooey orange face. "I'm sorry, it's just we're all in serious trouble," Eliza urged. The other survivors gathered around lazily, each of them seeming upbeat despite her grave news. "The flesh, SCP-610, they're here, they found us," she explained. "They killed Callow, and it won't take them long to find us." "They won't come here," one of the survivors replied, not argumentatively, but in a more uplifting and reassuring tone. "None of the other anomalies have found us in months," another interjected, smiling. "Not even the Foundation can get us here. We're protected. The Tickle Monster keeps us all safe." "But what if it can't protect us from the flesh?" Eliza desperately tried to warn her fellow survivors, but they were in too much of a carefree state to fear the approach of the flesh that hates. A number of them tried to convince her to relax, spend some time with the Tickle Monster so she wouldn't feel as bad. As appealing as that sounded, Eliza didn't want to let her guard down. She felt she owed SCP-999 for keeping her and the others alive, for helping them forget the horrific world the Foundation had unleashed. And even if she was the only one, she'd protect it. Night had fallen. The sound of every snapping twig felt like it could be one of the SCP-610s approaching. The rest of the camp was fast asleep, save for Eliza, wielding a flaming branch in one hand to ward off the flesh. Sure enough, through the shadows of the woods and the low light of her torch, she saw shapes began to shuffle towards her. The slick, bloody creatures looked even worse in the dark, shambling over to Eliza, backing away cautiously as she brandished her flame. But the flesh that hates was closing in, more and more of them slithering out from between the trees, causing her to step back in the direction of the camp. Suddenly, an excitable orange mass swept past Eliza. Under the torchlight, she saw SCP-999 approaching the fleshy mutations. "No!" she cried out, horrified at what they would do to her camp's protector. To her surprise, the flesh stopped in their tracks as the Tickle Monster wriggled up to them. They seemed to get closer, examining the orange goop as it grinned at them. Then, as if they had lost their innate hostility to anything that they hadn't yet infected, the SCP-610 creatures turned and left. Perhaps it was something within the slimy substance the Tickle Monster was made of that repelled the flesh that hates. Or maybe it was because it was such a sheer force of overwhelming good, and its increased power, that allowed SCP-999 to pacify the monstrosities. Either way, Eliza breathed a sigh of relief. The grinning orange blob turned to her and smiled, leaping up into her arms and allowing her to carry it back to camp. As SCP-999 turned her relief into happiness once again, it seemed that no matter how bleak the world might be, even in a timeline as horrifying as that of SCP-5000, wherever the Tickle Monster goes, there will always be the promise of positivity, and with it, a sliver of hope from the friendliest anomaly of all. Now go and check out SCP-999 the Tickle Monster, or What If SCP-999 Wore SCP-035 for more orange, blobby adventures.